The HR email landed at 9:12 a.m. 5 words that ended 14 years of loyalty. Compensation adjustment effective immediately. By 1 p.m., I was sitting under fluorescent lights, told to accept $50,000 or leave. I'd built their entire data system, saved them from collapse twice, and they wanted me gone because I was too expensive. That moment changed everything. What they didn't know was that I still had one clause left in my contract and one rival ready to make them regret it. Stay with me, subscribe, and tell me, what would you have done? I used to believe that loyalty meant safety. 14 years at Luminar Systems had made me sure of that. I knew every line of code in our client platform, every weak point in the data architecture that I'd quietly fixed while others took the credit. My badge still beeped with pride every morning when I walked through those glass doors overlooking the Seattle waterfront. Luminar wasn't just where I worked. It was where I rebuilt my life after the divorce. My son Ethan was only 6 when his father left, and I promised myself he'd never see me crumble. I was the one who kept the lights on, paid the bills, and made sure his science projects always had working batteries. I thought working harder would keep everything stable. Maybe that's why I ignored the signs. It started when Meridian Capital Partners bought us out last year. The new management spoke in slick slogans about optimization and market alignment. At first, it sounded like opportunity, but soon the hallway chatter turned tense. Teams disappeared. Projects quietly died. Friends were restructured. I kept my head down, did my work, and told myself that competence still mattered. My new COO, Samantha Vale, arrived 6 months ago from a consulting firm known for trimming fat. She was sharp, polished, and ruthless. The kind of executive who smiled when she said something cruel. Then came Troy Beckett, the new chief people officer, a man who treated HR like a war strategy. They walked through the building like they already owned it. I was on their radar from the start, the legacy hire, the one who'd been there too long. It's funny how quickly the tone shifts when you go from being called irreplaceable to being called overcompensated. My manager tried to warn me quietly. He said the executives were reviewing senior salaries, looking for what they called inefficiencies. I laughed it off. I thought, after all these years, my record would protect me. I brought in clients worth millions, managed crisis recoveries, trained half the department. But numbers don't mean much when someone in a suit decides you're a line item to erase. A few weeks before it happened, I started noticing strange details. Meetings I wasn't invited to, documents that used to be shared suddenly marked restricted. My requests for system upgrades got ignored. Once, I found a junior analyst, presenting a deck I'd written word for word, but with my name scrubbed from the credits. I confronted Samantha after that. She smiled, adjusted her blazer, and said, "Don't take it personally, Amelia. We're restructuring for efficiency." That was the first time I felt something break inside me. Not anger, just a deep, sinking certainty that something ugly was coming. At home, Ethan was working on his robotics project, asking if I'd be able to come to his demo day next month. I promised I would. I meant it. Back then, I still believed I'd have that job, that stability, that future. I didn't know that within days, I'd be sitting across from Troy and Samantha under those same buzzing lights, watching everything I'd built reduced to a number on a spreadsheet. I didn't know the moment was already on its way, the moment that would tear everything apart and force me to decide what loyalty was really worth. The email arrived just before lunch. Subject line, compensation review, attendance required. I stared at it long enough for the words to blur. The meeting was scheduled for 1 p.m. with Troy Beckett and Samantha Vale. No agenda, no explanation. I'd seen that format before. It meant bad news disguised as corporate formality. I sat at my desk pretending to focus on my code review, but my fingers barely moved. People were whispering in the hallway, quick glances that told me they knew something I didn't. I opened the break room fridge just to do something, poured myself a cup of coffee that tasted burnt and metallic, and forced myself to breathe. At 12:57, I stood outside the HR conference room, heart pounding, palms cold. The door opened on cue. Troy was already there, checking his smartwatch like this was a dentist appointment. Samantha stood by the window, arms crossed, calm and unreadable. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and nerves. Amelia, Troy said, his voice perfectly rehearsed. Thanks for coming in. Like I had a choice, I sat down across from them, folded my hands in my lap, and waited. Samantha slid a thin folder across the table. We've completed a comprehensive compensation review, she said, that same fake empathy dripping from every word. And after market alignment analysis, we've determined that certain senior roles have exceeded current benchmarks. I didn't move. What does that mean for me? Troy leaned forward, lowering his voice like he was breaking bad news to a child. It means, Amelia, your new base salary will be adjusted to $50,000 effective next month. The world went silent for a second, except for the low hum of the fluorescent lights above. 50,000. I blinked. That's a 70% cut. Samantha didn't blink. Yes, we understand it's an adjustment, but given current industry trends, I cut her off. Industry trends don't change my mortgage, or my son's school tuition, or the fact that I manage the infrastructure that keeps your biggest clients running. Troy smiled that HR smile that says nothing and means less. We're not questioning your contributions, Amelia. We're simply ensuring parity across the organization. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Parity? You're cutting the people who built this place while you hand out VP titles to your own hires. Samantha straightened, tone sharpening. You can, of course, decline, but that would be considered a voluntary resignation. The trap. Accept a pay cut I couldn't live on or quit and lose everything. How long do I have to decide? I asked quietly. Troy checked his watch again. End of business today. I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that surprised even me. You're giving me 4 hours to decide if I want to feed my kid or not. Samantha's expression didn't change. We need to move quickly. The organization can't remain in limbo. I looked at the folder on the table. My name, printed neatly at the top, above numbers that didn't make sense. My old salary, my new one. It looked like a typo. It wasn't. 14 years reduced to a spreadsheet edit. This is wrong, I said finally. It's not personal, Troy replied, which was how I knew it was absolutely personal. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and pushed the folder back across the table. I'll think about it. We'll need your decision by 5, Samantha reminded me. I walked out before either of them could say another word. The hallway felt longer than usual, filled with people avoiding my eyes. I made it to the parking lot, sat in my car, and stared at the dashboard. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unlock my phone. A text came in from Ethan. Mom, can you pick up poster board for my project tonight? I typed back, of course, even though my chest felt like it might cave in. I looked at the building I'd walked into every day for 14 years and felt something inside me split clean in two. Half of me wanted to scream. The other half wanted to never give them the satisfaction. By the time the clock hit 1:30, I'd stopped shaking. I started calculating rent, bills, groceries. Nothing worked. They'd cornered me completely, but they'd also underestimated one thing. I'd spent 14 years learning every line of this company's code, every loophole in its systems, and every clause in my own contract. And somewhere in those lines, I knew there had to be one they'd forgotten about. I sat in my car long after the engine cooled, staring at the concrete wall in front of me as if it might answer the question running through my head. What now? The folder with my new salary offer sat on the passenger seat like a death notice. $50,000. I did the math again and again, but every version ended the same way. There was no way to keep the apartment, no way to keep Ethan in his school, no way to live the life we'd built. I'd given them 14 years, and they'd given me 4 hours to vanish quietly. My phone buzzed again, this time from my bank app reminding me of next month's car payment. I closed my eyes, exhaled, and felt something break loose inside me. Not panic, not grief, something colder, clearer. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder I hadn't opened in years, my original employment contract. The pages were worn soft from age, but I'd kept them because part of me never fully trusted the promises companies made. I flipped through the legal jargon, eyes scanning the sections like code lines. Then I saw it. Clause 7C, right there in faded black ink. In the event of a constructive demotion or salary reduction exceeding 30%, the employee may terminate employment without penalty or notice, with full severance and equity rights intact. I reread it 3 times. My so-called adjustment was a 70% cut. They hadn't just humiliated me, they'd violated their own contract. I laughed out loud in the empty car, a sound halfway between relief and disbelief. They'd spent weeks strategizing how to corner me, and they'd missed the most obvious line in my file: my severance, my equity, my escape hatch. The irony made me want to cry. I thought about Samantha's smug expression, the way she said market alignment like she was blessing me with wisdom. I thought about Troy's smartwatch ticking down the minutes until I'd disappear. They assumed I'd fold because that's what people like me do. We swallow it, we say thank you, we leave quietly. But I wasn't leaving quietly. I was going to make sure they regretted underestimating me. I scrolled through my phone, pulling up every name and number that mattered. The clients who trusted me personally, the engineers who still owed me favors, the vendors who'd call me before they'd ever call Luminar's new leadership. I didn't need to take a single file. The knowledge was already mine. Years of relationships, patterns, passwords, preferences, it all lived in my head, and I wasn't stealing anything. I was reclaiming what they'd thrown away. I thought about Ethan then. His robotics demo, his big grin when I promised I'd be there. I'd meant that promise. Now it wasn't just about survival, it was about showing him that you don't let people decide your worth. I started to feel calm again, the kind of calm that comes right before a storm. I pulled out my laptop, logged into my personal email, and started documenting everything: screenshots, timelines, call logs. I wasn't sure what I'd need, but I knew the next move had to be smart, not emotional. The light outside was fading, the parking garage half empty, the air echoing with the hum of engines leaving for the night. I looked at the building one more time. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a shell, something that used to mean stability, but now only symbolized control. I closed the A folder, put it back in my bag, and whispered to myself, "You're not trapped, Amelia. They are." Then I started the engine, drove out into the cool Seattle evening, and made myself a promise. By tomorrow morning, they would know exactly how it feels to underestimate the wrong woman. By the time I got home that night, the sky had turned the color of steel, and my apartment felt heavier than usual. Ethan was already asleep, his science project spread across the kitchen table, like a tiny battlefield of wires and sensors. I stood there watching him breathe, thinking about the words voluntary resignation and how casually they'd been used to erase everything I'd built. I poured myself a glass of water I didn't drink and sat on the couch, the contract open in front of me. Clause 7C glared back like a secret weapon waiting to be drawn. It gave me leverage, but leverage wasn't enough. I needed a plan. I needed an exit that didn't look like surrender. I opened my laptop, started searching through industry news, and saw what I should have noticed months ago. Luminar's biggest rival, NovaEdge Technologies, had been quietly poaching engineers from companies bought by Meridian Capital. They were building a new division focused on predictive systems, and my work had been the blueprint they were trying to copy. My phone buzzed, startling me. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something in me said, "Pick up." "Amelia Hartman," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. The voice on the other end was calm, confident, the kind of voice used to giving good news. "Miss Hartman, this is Julian Cross from NovaEdge Technologies. I hope I'm not calling too late." My mind went blank. NovaEdge. "How did you get my number?" I asked. "Through a mutual contact, Lena Ortiz. She spoke highly of you." I exhaled slowly. Lena had left Luminar 6 months ago after the acquisition, vanished into the tech world's rumor mill. "What's this about?" I said. Julian's tone softened but stayed precise. "Let's just say word travels fast. We heard what happened today, and we've been watching your work for some time. You've kept Luminar's biggest account stable through 2 management changes and 3 budget crises. That's rare." I stayed quiet, waiting for the catch. "We want to make you an offer." he continued. Head of enterprise integration, full autonomy, a team of your choosing, base salary $180,000. And we'd like to talk tomorrow morning before the day gets too crowded. I almost laughed. You're offering me a promotion before we've even met? No, he said. We're offering you what you're already worth. For a second, I couldn't speak. After everything, being reduced to a number, treated like a liability, hearing someone say I was worth something felt dangerous. Why now? I asked finally. Because timing matters, Julian said, and because when a company shows you who they are, it's smart to believe them. The line went quiet for a heartbeat. Meet me at the Harbor Cafe on Western Avenue. 7 a.m. I'll have the paperwork ready and the coffee. Before I could answer, he added, Bring that clause you found. You'll want it handy. The call ended, leaving the room unnervingly still. I sat there, phone in my hand, heart racing. The rational part of me said it was reckless to meet a stranger, that I needed to think it through. But the part of me that had been humiliated under fluorescent lights earlier that day knew exactly what this was. A door opening just wide enough to walk through. I closed my laptop, slid the contract into my bag, and whispered into the quiet apartment. Tomorrow starts the rebuild. Then I went to bed, the kind of sleep that isn't rest but resolve. The alarm went off at 6, but I'd already been awake for an hour, watching the ceiling and replaying every word from that phone call. I got up, dressed in my sharpest blazer, the one I used to wear for client presentations, the armor of someone who refuses to be small. The city was still gray when I drove to the Harbor Cafe. Julian Cross was already there, seated by the window, a man who looked like he'd never rushed for anything in his life. When I sat down, he smiled like we were old friends meeting again, not strangers negotiating a lifeline. Black coffee, 2 sugars, he said, sliding a cup toward me. You've done your homework, I replied. He chuckled. I do my homework on people worth it. Then he got straight to it. We've been tracking Meridian's moves. They buy, they strip, they sell. You're not the first to get cut, just the first to fight back. He opened a folder, and there it was, my new offer. $180,000 base, $25,000 signing bonus, full benefits, full creative control. Why me? I asked. Because you build systems that last, he said simply, and because we know who really kept Luminar alive these past few years. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I reached for the folder, felt the paper's weight, the certainty in it. If I come, I said carefully, I'm not coming alone. I have 2 people, Priya Desai and Jordan Lin. They've been holding Luminar together under impossible conditions. I don't leave them behind. Done, Julian said without hesitation. We'll have their offers by end of week. That was the moment I decided. I shook his hand, firm and steady, and said, Then you'll have my resignation by noon. His smile widened. Good, just make sure it's memorable. On the drive to Luminar, the air felt different, sharper, lighter. When I walked into the building, I noticed how quiet everything was, how no one met my eyes. It was as if the walls already knew what I was about to do. I walked straight past my desk, past the nervous glances, and down the hall to HR. Troy was there, typing something smugly into his computer. Samantha stood near the window on the phone, her voice clipped and mechanical. I didn't wait for her to finish. We need to talk, I said, placing the contract folder on Troy's desk. He looked up, blinking like he'd seen a ghost. Amelia, we didn't get your response yesterday, he started. I know, I said, because I found something better than responding. I found Clause 7C. His face froze. I'm invoking it. Effective immediately, I'm terminating my employment under a constructive demotion exceeding 30%. That means you owe me full severance and equity payout. Samantha finally looked up, her expression cracking for the first time. That's not... I cut her off. You should probably reread the contract your legal team inherited from before Meridian bought us. It's very clear. Troy's lips moved, but no words came out. I continued, calm but firm. Also, just so we're clear, I'm leaving today and I'm not alone. You'll be receiving resignation letters from Priya Desai and Jordan Lin by end of week. Samantha's voice sharpened. You can't coordinate exits. That's solicitation. No, I said evenly. That's friendship. They make their own choices just like I am. I reached into my bag and pulled out my badge, set it neatly on the desk. I haven't taken a single file, haven't copied a byte of data, haven't violated any clause. All I'm taking is what's in my head, and you can't confiscate that. Troy stood up, voice rising. You're making a mistake. You have a child, bills, a mortgage. Think about what you're risking. I turned toward the door. Don't you dare use my son as leverage. I'm not the one who should be afraid of risk right now. Samantha's voice followed me, brittle and furious. Where will you even go? I glanced back. Somewhere that pays me what I'm worth. I walked out, ignoring the stunned silence around me. By the time the elevator doors closed, I felt the strangest thing. A calm so deep it was almost joy. I'd walked in powerless and was walking out free. Outside, the air was cool and sharp against my face. I looked up at the Luminar logo gleaming on the glass facade, then turned away without a backward glance. I had a meeting at NovaEdge, a future waiting, and a lesson burned into my chest. Never let anyone mistake your silence for surrender. By the time I got home that afternoon, it felt like the air itself had changed. I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and wrote the simplest email of my career. After 14 years with Luminar Systems, I've decided to pursue a new opportunity. Effective immediately, I'll be joining NovaEdge Technologies as head of enterprise integration. I sent it to every client I'd ever managed, people who had trusted me, who'd called me at midnight when systems crashed, who knew I delivered when no one else could. I didn't write anything dramatic, just gratitude, professionalism, closure. Within an hour, my inbox began to fill. The first reply came from Astracom. Congratulations, Amelia. We've been considering moving our account. Let's discuss next week. Then Delta Core, then Hylene. 11 of my 14 clients reached out by 3 p.m., all asking about transition logistics. They didn't care about Luminar, they cared about trust. That was the currency I'd built over years, and now it was paying out in full. At 4, my phone rang. Amelia Hartman? The voice was sharp, tense. Troy. We need to discuss your unauthorized client communications. I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. There's nothing unauthorized about informing professional contacts of a change in employment. You're attempting to solicit them. No, Troy, I said, calm and deliberate. I'm informing them. What they decide is up to them. And since I don't have a non-compete, I suggest you call legal before making threats you can't enforce. He didn't reply, just hung up. I stared at the silent phone for a second, then started laughing. The kind of laughter that comes when fear burns away completely. I had spent years making Luminar look stable while its leadership hollowed it out, and now the hollow was finally collapsing in on itself. The next few days were a blur of action. NovaEdge set me up with an office overlooking the harbor, a small team, and full authority to rebuild our client structure. Priya and Jordan joined by week's end, their resignation sent quietly, respectfully, and absolutely final. We worked day and night transferring accounts, rewriting frameworks, and onboarding new clients. Luminar tried to fight back with cease and desist letters, but NovaEdge's legal team responded in kind. It wasn't even close. I heard through Lena that Samantha had been forced into special project reassignment, which everyone knew meant fired without ceremony. Troy was demoted. Meridian Capital pulled out of the planned IPO. The investors had seen the numbers. When your biggest contracts walk away overnight, you don't go public, you sink. 2 weeks later, NovaEdge announced that we'd absorbed more than 50% of Luminar's lost revenue. Julian congratulated me, saying I'd accomplished in days what most people couldn't in a year. But what stayed with me wasn't the numbers. It was the first Friday evening I left the office on time, walked home as the sun was setting, and found Ethan waiting with dinner he'd cooked himself, mac and cheese and burnt garlic bread. How was work, Mom? He asked. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Better than it's ever been. And I meant it. Luminar had collapsed, but I'd finally started to rebuild, on my own terms. Months later, I stood in my new office at NovaEdge, sunlight spilling across the floor, and thought about how different everything felt. No tension humming in the walls, no dread waiting in the inbox, just work that mattered and people who respected it. Luminar had folded within a year. Meridian stripped what was left and moved on. But I didn't feel triumph. I felt clarity. All those nights I'd spent worrying about being too expensive, about not fitting into someone else's spreadsheet, now seemed absurd. The truth was simple. I had never been the liability. They were. One afternoon, Ethan came home from school holding a certificate from his robotics competition, his grin wide and proud. "I won first place," he said. I hugged him tight, fighting back tears. "You earned it." He looked up at me. "You did too, Mom." Later, after he went to bed, I sat by the window watching the harbor lights flicker over the water and realized I wasn't angry anymore. The revenge wasn't destroying Luminar. It was proving that I could rise without them. That night, I wrote one final note to myself on a sticky pad and left it on my monitor. Never forget what you're worth. Looking back, I realize revenge was never really the point. It wasn't about watching Luminar fall apart or seeing the people who humiliated me lose their jobs. What mattered was reclaiming my sense of worth after I'd let other people define it for so long. The truth is, most of us don't wake up one day ready to walk away. We stay because it's familiar, because loyalty feels noble, because we believe hard work will eventually be enough. But sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to keep fighting for a place at a table that's already decided you don't belong. It's to build your own. I learned that silence can be a weapon sharper than anger. I didn't need to shout or expose anyone. I just needed to walk away and let their own choices catch up with them. That's what justice really looks like in the real world. Not grand gestures, but quiet consequences. And forgiveness? It came later, not because they deserved it, but because I did. Carrying anger would have chained me to them forever. Letting it go was how I finally set myself free. The moral isn't that every battle ends in total victory. Sometimes the most satisfying outcome is simply knowing the people who underestimated you had to live with the results of their own arrogance. Sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence is the sharpest knife. The lesson is simple but heavy. Know your worth and never wait for others to confirm it. In a world obsessed with optimization, remember that you're not a number on someone's spreadsheet. You're the value they can't replace. How to get started today. Review your own boundaries at work. Write down what's no longer acceptable. Pull out your old contracts or emails. Knowledge is protection. Start building quiet connections outside your company. Relationships are your real safety net. Remind yourself, even once today, that walking away isn't failure, it's freedom. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear they're not stuck. Drop a comment with your own workplace experience, hit subscribe, and join me for more stories about knowing your worth and choosing your peace.